What do you think is like the biggest USP of Flix? Unique selling point.
Many people don't know that if you look at our core markets in particular, we don't own any buses. Essentially, we work together with third-party bus partners.
If you're acquainted with the brand, if you perceive the brand as a warm, funny, entertaining one, you're more inclined to buy from them, right?
Yeah, and I mean, at Flix, what we try to do is enabling travel for everyone, and we also say that we want to do this for them to get more from life.
Hello there, and welcome to another exciting episode of the EGN Podcast. I'm your host, Efe von Thenen. Today we sit down with Alex Schlüter, VP Marketing and Customer Product at Flix, a leading global travel tech company. From its humble beginnings in 2013 to becoming a powerhouse with a presence in over 40 countries and a revenue of 2 billion euros in 2023, Flix's journey is nothing short of remarkable. Join us as we explore the journey of Flix, its disruptive approach to the travel industry, and its profitable growth strategy. Hi, Alex. Welcome to the show. We're very happy to have you here today talking about Flix, the very exciting business model of Flix, and also get to know you as a person and talk about the inspiring success of your company in the last decade. So welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Great to be here, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, go ahead, introduce yourself, please.
Sure. So I'm Alex. I'm VP Marketing and Customer Product at Flix. I will explain in a second what that exactly means. I joined the company about 2 years ago. Prior to that, I have a background in consulting, so I spent quite some time at McKinsey advising all kinds of e-commerce players and tech companies on various topics on customer centricity, marketing, and other topics. And then at Flix, as I said, the title is Marketing and Customer Product. Essentially, that means that I am responsible for 3 areas. One area is marketing, the second one is sales, and the third one would be customer product. I think marketing is quite self-explanatory. Sales for us means online distribution, so that would be meta searchers that aggregate various mobility types, bus, train, etc. And the other thing of sales would be offline distribution, so that's our own shops, but also third-party resellers and agencies. And the last part is customer product. Customer products means that we have the ownership of the customer-facing product, so we really look at the customer journey, customer experience, and try to understand where we can improve it to have happier and returning customers, and ultimately then have higher customer retention and better customer lifetime value.
Alex, take us through the journey since the establishment of Flix 2013. What milestones have you seen in the company? I think you were also observing it beforehand, before you even started at Flix, yeah. So we're also curious about this.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I joined 2 years ago, so the most of this 11-year journey I observed as an outside observer, but still I think it's a very, very impressive journey. Last year in 2023, we had 2 billion in revenue, and we are now in over 40 countries. So I think it's important to understand the scope also of this company. Yeah. I think I mentioned to you in the conversation we had earlier that even my friends and family, when I told them I'm joining Flix, they were a bit curious and asked what is this about? Is this bus company? But no, it's actually a tech company that is now active globally in a lot of markets. Yeah. The one number that is easy to remember is our passenger numbers from 2023, because we had 80 million passengers.
Wow.
Which is the population of Germany, and for me that is quite a cool thing to think of. Last year,
that's global, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah. So globally, last year we transported as many people as the population of Germany, and that's I think quite a cool number. It hasn't always been like that, obviously. So I think 11 years ago, our 3 founders, Andre, Jochen, and Daniel, they saw the opportunity of the deregulation of the German bus market and wanted to seize that opportunity and founded Flix Bus. And back then, really, a lot of things were done by hand. So I remember seeing pictures of them in a small room with A1 printouts of the scheduling and the plans they were making, and did this by hand. And I think what they've done very well is a lot of things, but maybe two things in particular. The one thing is scaling and growing the company, and also consolidating the market by doing that.
Yeah.
And the second thing is they did this by building technology and tech tools to really help them and support that. And I think that's what makes us very successful today, that obviously we don't have these A1 printouts where we look at the schedule, but we have a lot of tools like network planning tools, pricing, marketing, all these things that really help both our bus partners and our customers.
I really like that you mentioned this example with the A1 paper, because we had My Muesli in the podcast, and you can imagine how much manual effort they had at the beginning, really mixing the muesli themselves. And so it's very inspiring to see how that scales up. And you mentioned you have a couple of areas that you manage. And I'm very curious about this growth part. We will get to that. And to understand, though, you're a marketing guy. You're in marketing. So what do you think is like the biggest USP of Flix? Unique selling point.
Yeah, thanks.
No, in case you didn't know that as a marketer.
No, I think what's very interesting about Flix is many people don't know that if you look at our core markets in particular, we don't own any buses. So essentially, we work together with third-party bus partners. And what we offer is a platform that is in the middle between, on the one hand side, the customer, and on the other side, it's our bus partners. So it's a little bit like a Uber or Airbnb model. And so we have USPs on both sides, right?
Yeah.
So if you look, for example, on the bus partner side, I think, as I mentioned, usually a lot of things are done by hand. And if you imagine that you are a family-owned bus company with a couple of buses, you do a little bit of charter business, you might not have a good idea about marketing, pricing, network planning, customer service, traffic control, like all these things. And this is what we offer to those partners. And we come to them and say, hey, if you sign up with us, we will basically take care of this, and you take care of the day-to-day operations.
Yeah.
And obviously, this is super successful as a business model. Some of these bus partners have started with like 1 or 2 buses and are now huge operations and drive for us. So that is something that we really offer and bring to the table at a fair revenue share for these bus partners, to say we take care of all the things that we can do very good, scalable on a global level.
Like bringing the customers traffic and all these things also.
Exactly. So we basically tell them, look, you don't need to, think about how you get your buses full and, at what time it is best to drive from A to B. We will take care of that. We will get the people into the buses. Yeah. And also, even if something goes wrong, right? So if a bus breaks down, we are in charge of the customer service. Yeah. We can rebook passengers, we can do the rerouting. So all these things that are usually quite costly also if you are doing an operations with just a couple of buses, we take care for those bus partners.
Most importantly, I think it's also this consumer journey that you're taking care of, the brand experience that you're standardized. I love to break things down to comparison to other examples. So coming from the world of e-commerce, I'm thinking, and this is maybe comparable to the price comparison engines or like the marketplaces that actually bring lots of traffic, and you can be a seller on these platforms and you benefit. You're not present as a brand. You're kind of like you're present with your product. In this case, these bus companies are present with their services, I would say. So I was like thinking, in a way, when Uber came about and disrupted the taxi market, many taxi drivers were even striking, and they were a bit upset with that at the beginning. And you see, like in your case, it seems to be rather a synergy where the platform is catering to both parties.
I think so. And I mean, if we stick with the bus partners on the one hand, I think also the cool thing is that it's really a long-term engagement we do with those bus partners, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's also quite a commitment for them to do business with us because, I mean, they're driving around with big green buses essentially, right? So this is, expensive equipment that is branded. So it's also, an important step for them to do this. But it's really a long-term commitment and a much longer lasting relationship that we have with those partners. And as you mentioned, then there's USPs on the other side for the customer because the customer then knows what to expect on a global scale. So they really understand, okay, if I buy a Flix product, if I or buy something with FlixBus, there are certain standards and essentially they know what they get. They get affordable green mobility and they have comfort, safety, all these things that usually if you enter any bus, you might be a bit uncertain, what kind of offering is this? But with FlixBus, you know exactly what you get.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially, I would assume that this makes scaling on a global scale easier because everywhere you can offer this similar standard comparable to the success of all these companies like Burger King that started with a simple restaurant in the US and then just expanded, and everywhere you go in the world you can expect a similar, although this is a franchise model in many cases, so you can expect a similar service, similar standards. So for me that's very exciting, but still the biggest question is like the strategy, how to scale this much. You mentioned that you're in 40 markets, and first of all, I'm curious about the top 3, 4, 5, something that maybe you can tell us a little bit about the best markets that you see. Apart from that, also maybe some of the challenges that you've seen in this global expansion.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest markets, and I think, I'm not sure if you mentioned it already, would of course be the US. So North America is a market that we expanded, quite a bit by acquiring Greyhound. I think a brand that has over 100-year history and legacy. And we acquired Greyhound back during the pandemic, and that was, a huge encounter to try to also integrate all the technology onto the Flix platform. Because one thing that is important to us, that I also know that other brands do it sometimes differently, is that we have a one platform approach. So we try whenever we go, buy another company or when we expand into other markets to do it with one platform, because that unlocks also synergies for our other markets. And if you then look at the US, obviously, this was a massive project to buy essentially a huge legacy company with over 100 years of history and try to incorporate them into in our company and make the business ready for the next decades to come. And there were a lot of challenges, and I think it was a big encounter. But obviously, like at the end, ultimately, it was a very, very successful thing to then have everything on one platform. And now, if you go to Greyhound.com, for example, or Flixbus.com, obviously the sites are still branded in either
individually
green or blue. So that's clear. But you can also book a Greyhound bus on Flixbus.com. You can book the Flixbus on Greyhound.com, and we have interconnectivity. The pricing is run by the same engine, so that's actually all one integrated.
So you're keeping the Greyhound brand because it's a well-known brand in the US, but everything is integrated with your own engine. Yeah, that sounds interesting. I was, 2005, I was a bachelor student at an American university in New York. I used to travel with Greyhound buses quite often, so I remember that still. Can't complain. It was a good service back then also, but I remember it didn't strike me as this like most innovative bus company. But now you've been there and disrupting also. And how does that work though? So let's say you're taking a bus from New York to I don't know, like give us an example of how Greyhound even helps Flix to be more successful in this market?
I think if you look at the US and the two brands, there's at the moment also quite a big difference in network. I mean, we do have interconnectivity, but essentially Flix or Flixbus in the US is a point-to-point brand where you can basically take a bus from, I mean, most popular relations would be LA, Las Vegas, or Boston, New York, like these relatively short A to B relations, direct connections where basically I also took a Greyhound bus back in the days when I was studying from New York to Boston. I think New York to Boston, if you now look at the offering, almost all of that is Flixbus. So that is the brand that operates those relations. If you then look at Greyhound, on the other hand, it is really the brand that enables travel for America to go essentially wherever you want to go, right? So you can hop on a Greyhound bus on the one coast and basically drive, you know, for obviously several hours, but essentially end up everywhere you would like to go. And I think that is an interesting concept where also those two brands are a bit complementary to each other, because one brand is really connecting A to B, especially in the coast. The other brand is really trying to enable mobility for the entire nation and like penetrate the country from, you know, left to right, northeast, west east. So that's actually a quite cool concept.
So it's fair to say that among these 40 markets that you're in, you're pretty much established in the Western developed regions in the world, but also expanding to some exciting new markets. Tell us about it.
It's true, yeah. I mean, we just talked about the US. Then obviously Europe is our core markets. I mean, we expanded from Germany into essentially entire Europe. And now it's a very interesting time to look at other places. We are also present in South America. So we have been in Brazil for some time. Last year we expanded into Chile. And this year, very fresh, we expanded into India.
Wow.
Which is, you know, supposed to be one of the largest bus markets in the world. Obviously, also different to, let's say, the German bus market. But I think it's super exciting to enter this market as the global brand that, as you mentioned earlier, offers, you know, a product where I have certain quality standards, safety standards. And I basically know exactly what are the USPs and what do I sign up with, because in the Indian market it's very fragmented, and to then be the one brand that stands out as the, you know, Western brand with the consistent quality and the consistent service, that is the approach that we're trying. And so far it's very exciting, looking good, but obviously, you know, we just launched the market, but it's super interesting times to be at Flix.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that also comes with cooperating with lots of local partners, be it payment, be it logistics, operations, and all these things. So it's a massive, I think the expansion brings with itself quite a bit of complexity as well. But I think that's that brings me to the next question about the success recipe, right? So you're a growing company, obviously expanding into new markets. Is it? I'm curious about local intricacies. For example, when you go to new markets, is it fair to say like you have a successful business model and you just apply it one-to-one to this new market, or is it always like a clear analysis and like in certain cases you have to really change a lot of things in how you address the customers, how depending on the local culture? Can you give us a couple of examples?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so obviously, as I said, it makes it easy to have one platform and a relatively scalable approach. But nevertheless, not gonna lie, whenever we launch a new market, we need to adjust our recipe slightly because every market has some local differences from the other markets that we've been there before. A super easy or a super, I think, tangible example would be the US. If I go back to the Greyhound example, before we launched, before we integrated Greyhound at Flix, you could only book one interconnection, for example. And you know, when we looked at Greyhound, they basically showed us an analysis and said, look, that's not going to work for us because many of our customers, a very sizable amount, is interchanging 2, 3, 4, 5 times to get from A to B. And that was a new thing to us. And that meant that we needed to adapt and basically do a tech development to make that possible for the US. We now can interchange up to 5 times in the US with Flix and Greyhound. And the cool thing is that whenever we do something like this has synergies for other markets. So now in Europe, for example, you can also interchange more than just one time. And that has also unlocked additional revenue for us. Funnily enough, for this example, I think in the US, it's really a topic about covering the distance and the vast land of the US. In Europe, since the network is a bit more dense and a bit different from the US, this interconnectivity has unlocked things that we didn't anticipate. For example, that you can go from Kiel in northern Germany to like a smaller city in the south of Germany by interchanging 2 or 3 times, which is not a massive distance, but before that, just because of the dynamics of the network, were not possible, and now we can offer those services. So that would be one example. I think another example now, if you look at India, is we introduced gender seating, which will be relevant for markets like India, but also maybe other markets that have this requirement. So for example, if you're a female traveler and you're traveling alone, you basically will only sit either alone or next to other female passengers. And that is something that we now implemented in our process. So we offer this in India and can now apply this in every market where it is necessary.
In certain markets, there's even like female-only buses, for example. Interesting. Not only the seating, but also in like just the normal buses that take you within the same city to A to B.
And I think that's definitely also something to look at. Different buses is a good example. For example, in Latin America, but also India, the buses also might look different because you don't have the standard bus with 2 seats here, 2 seats here, and upright seating, because it is much more common to have night buses and even sleeper buses. So in India, we now have for the first time also really buses that basically that are fully sleeper, so you have beds and can sleep while you're traveling. Something that is not super common in the European market. So I don't think this would have mattered to be successful in Germany. But in India, it's something that you need to offer because this is what people want and how people like to travel.
You mentioned you're responsible for marketing, you're responsible for sales and customer journeys. Those are buckets, but they also have to have some sort of an interplay between them. How do you bring the inbound customers that interact with your website, your app and everything, and then become customers? How do you make sure that they keep coming back? Tell us a little bit about your marketing strategy.
So at Flix in general, we have a profitable growth strategy, which means essentially that we obviously want to keep growing at a very fast pace, but also we want to do so profitable. And that trickles down also to the marketing strategy. And for marketing, essentially, it means that we look at all our activities and try to understand where are the areas where we need to become much more efficient. And we are, I think I can proudly say we're relatively good in performance marketing and SEA, but that is an area where we also are super efficient in how we steer it. So that would be an area where we say, okay, here we can, especially in the core markets, become even more efficient. Also, obviously, the best thing to become more efficient is if you get free traffic and returning customers. Therefore, I think it makes a lot of sense also to have this under one roof: customer product, customer retention, and customer satisfaction. And on the other hand, the marketing side. Because if you do that, obviously, it brings a lot of efficiency. That's what we want to do on the one hand side. And then on the other side, we want to then understand where we can strategically invest to fuel our growth. And I mean, I mentioned India, Chile. Those would be then typically those markets where we say, okay, here we need to also grow and reinvest the money that we gain by efficiency gains in other areas.
To get more specific on, you mentioned performance marketing is functioning pretty well. We also hear from some other guests here that the customer acquisition costs are increasing, and it's kind of becoming more challenging for some segments at least. Tell us a little bit more about what works for you and what doesn't.
Yeah. I think what's interesting about Flix, and we will talk about the customer experience also later, where this is also important, is the connection between offline and online. Because we are a tech company, but essentially the whole experience and the product is essentially an offline product. And also for us, when we look at performance marketing, it means that we have a certain relation. Let's say if you want to take a bus from Munich to Stuttgart, for example, and this is served by multiple bus partners that drive this route. And what we then do is we look at all these routes and understand, okay, what is the profitability of the underlying routes? A little bit like you would do it probably in e-commerce, but it's a bit like in a traditional e-commerce sense, where you look at, okay, what is the profitability of a certain product? But here it's a bit more complex because, depending on A to B, it might be a different underlying set of profitabilities. And this is then, fed into our bidding engine that then tries to understand, okay, what is the ROAS that I now want to get for this particular relation, considering also pre-booking times and understanding, okay, if a customer now searches for this, what is the optimal value that I need to have to then at the end optimize for bottom line. And that is a mechanism that we now optimized over years to really bring together that offline part of our business and the online part of our business.
Sounds very exciting, especially in offline. It's for many businesses, it's kind of a black box. You don't really know. You don't have that much data on how the customer's interacting with, whether or not you probably have mechanisms to understand whether or not a customer was satisfied after a certain ride, and I can imagine that those can be built. But for me, the most exciting part is bringing all those data points together, because that to me seems like a big challenge.
It is, but the thing is, you need to do it because it's the only way to, in a data-driven way, optimize the customer experience. And I think what we are doing to understand the impact of the offline journey on essentially customer retention is we have certain sources of information. That's something that also other companies have.
Informants on the bus,
we do have a mystery shopping program. So if somebody from Flix wants to travel, and we encourage everybody to use our product as often as possible.
Then product testers also?
Yeah, so then there's a form that you can fill out and provide feedback. And there's a lot of feedback that we get from those sources. It's a bit biased, obviously, because if you work for the company, you obviously also usually quite happy with the product, and you have a relationship to the product. But that's one source. I also recently sold tickets in a Flix shop, which also gives you a completely new insights in what the customer expects in those offline touch points, because you might not think about certain instances.
Eat your own dog food, right?
Exactly. So it's super interesting, and I think it's something you need to do. But obviously, we also rely on the data that we get from our customers, from customer surveys, for example. So after every ride, you can fill out a survey and tell us about your experience. Obviously, customer service interactions, where we also do sentiment analysis on the feedback to really understand were they happy and what are the pain points. And then one thing we also did is we wanted to have a mechanism that, in a data-driven way, links retention to offline experiences. So we have a machine learning model that tells us for a bunch of touch points, like for example, a bus had a delay, or the Wi-Fi was not working, all these kinds of things. What is the effect that we can see from the customer behavior after this ride, even if we don't get the feedback? So it essentially tells us where to also prioritize our investments. Would we invest in better Wi-Fi? Do we want to adjust the scheduling to have less delays? Do we want to invest in station equipment? These kind of things to help us prioritize these investments by really connecting the offline world to the online.
I have one more question.
Of course.
On TikTok. It's very interesting that you have a massively successful TikTok channel, and I think like one of the posts had over 10 million views. Tell us about how that's going.
Yeah, that was an interesting journey, because I think we launched our TikTok channel a bit more than a year ago, so it's a relatively new thing that we're doing. And as you said, it has been super successful. I think we have 650,000 followers on TikTok. I think the video that you mentioned has like 11 million views. We have a lot of videos with like views in like the millions. Super exciting to play around and experiment with this new channel, because it also helps us to connect with an audience that is younger, and that you reach just in a different way. I think hopefully I don't sound like a boomer if I say something like this, but I remember one day I was in the office with one of our social media managers, and I asked her, what are you working on? And I think she looked at me and says, yeah, Alex,
you wouldn't get it.
You wouldn't understand. Yes, she said, Alex, you wouldn't understand. And I felt a little bit offended.
How old are you, by the way?
I'm 35,
okay,
so I'm not super old. But I looked at her and I was like, I'm a bit offended. So show me now what you're doing.
I'm cool.
Exactly. And she was showing it to me, and then after like 10 seconds, I looked at her and was like, you were right.
I don't get it.
I don't get it.
Yeah.
And I'm also quite new on TikTok, so I think I downloaded last year also for work, to be quite honest, to really understand it. And now also I think the algorithm, the addiction is starting to grow on me. And now I probably would also get what we're doing, or I get what we're doing on TikTok, because you're more in sync with all the trends that are happening. But it's a lot of fun. I think one of the things that we're doing is this sleigh bus, which is essentially a toy Flix bus that has glued on lips and sunglasses and does a lot of weird things. We have done collaborations.
It's similar to Ryanair. I love that channel also.
It is just a lot of funny, weird content. We do stuff with Duolingo, for example, which is cool, because obviously it's a green bird, and we love green at Flix. So that is a cool thing. And I mean, we're not done experimenting. I think for us it's now also interesting to understand what more can we do, and how can we then leverage also this massive reach that we have on TikTok. So for us it's super exciting to also keep experimenting with these new opportunities and new challenges, because the world will, was a different one 5 years ago compared to now. If you look at marketing, and also in 5 years, a lot of things will also change. So it's always important to understand where you can keep up and where you can keep experimenting.
Yeah. I would say, like, given that we had TikTok in the podcast as well, and Sarah, our interview partner, told us from TikTok that they have, at that time, they were about at 26 years as the average age for TikTok users. But of course, they want to go a little bit higher.
I'm definitely above the average then. I think this is...
Me too, but trust me, TikTok is even giving me a warning every day. Like, you've been on TikTok too long. Like, it's been 20 minutes. Are you sure? So like my thumb is hurting. I think it's fun. It's entertaining. But most importantly, I think it's a good place to be for brands these days, especially for mobility companies that also have an affordable end-to-customer product. Because like let's imagine average age is 26, and you're inevitably, you might be a student still, maybe doing some master's degree. You might not have that much money to, like, if I were to compare that, frankly speaking, if you were to compare that to some other offers, be it train or be it other bus companies, it's still a good deal. It's a very good deal for them. So if you're acquainted with the brand, if you perceive the brand as a warm, funny, entertaining one, you're more inclined to buy from them, right?
Yeah, and I mean, at Flix, what we try to do is enabling travel for everyone, and we also say that we want to do this for them to get more from life. Means for us that we want to do it for old people and young people. Really, like, wanting to be a mobility provider for everyone. That also means, being present on TikTok and trying to also convince this audience that we are a cool brand to look after. And I think when you mentioned affordability, that is still obviously one of our key USPs. I think we didn't talk so much about the customer-facing USPs earlier.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, affordable mobility is still, affordability is still the main USP for our customers.
Yeah.
But what is cool and interesting to see is also if we look at surveys and feedback we get from customers that affordability is still important, but other things are also gaining in importance. And it's more the product-related attributes like comfort, good connectivity, convenience. And the thing is, like with our network, I think there are some relations where we're even more affordable, but also, frankly, sometimes faster than let's, for example, say the train. And it's good to see also that those more product-related attributes are gaining in importance in addition to affordability.
Sounds nice, especially when talking about the customer groups. And I mentioned the demographics on TikTok, for example. Can you shed some light on the demographics of your user base?
Yeah, it's really very, very diverse. So as I said, the objective is really enabling travel for everyone. And if we look at our demographics, we really see a slightly younger customer base than the average demographics. I think that's also not surprising. But we're also very proud that we have quite a lot of travelers also in the 60, 65 years plus age range. So that is super interesting to see that we are really fulfilling that promise to say, hey, we are here for everyone. We're not just for students or like elderly people. It's basically really a brand that tries to have a presence for everybody.
Yeah, we had some experts in the podcast that talked about the future of work and corporate cultures. So it is one thing how we as end users perceive your brand out there, how we experiment with how we experience your product or products. It is another, what makes me curious, what is the innovation culture or what is the corporate culture like at Flix?
It's very interesting to say corporate culture, because when I hear corporate, I immediately think it's probably more the company culture, which is quite interesting to because the first thing I would say is, I mean, we're not yet a corporate, or maybe it's a good thing to maybe not yet be a corporate. It's a super interesting and exciting culture. I hope I can make a couple of examples to make that a bit clear, because I'm sure that everybody claims that they have a great company culture. I think I gave already a couple of examples how data-driven Flix is. So we really try to leverage the data that we have and make decisions, not because we have a good gut feeling. I mean, sometimes you have to have a good gut feeling, but also we try to really be data-driven and back everything up with data. But we're also still a very humble but also nerdy culture at Flix. Maybe one weird example. I'm a collector of board games and I have over 200 board games at home. And one day I brought quite a massive board game to the office and I asked a couple of people if we want to play. And so we gathered like 10 to 15 people and we played this. And after 2 weeks of having fun in the office with these board games, I get a Teams message from one of the people that we played with, and it's like, yeah, Alex, so you don't need to bring your big board game anymore. We now bought it for the office, so we can play it all the time. Nice. So feel free to join us. But now we have it on our own. And whenever I'm in the Berlin office, we're playing these board games on Thursday evening, and really across departments and hierarchy levels, we're just having a lot of fun until late at night. So that is, just one super nerdy example of how the company culture is. But I think it's an interesting mix of, still having the startup vibes, but also being a, maturing, grown-up company that, has, with a company of this size, a lot of maturity and, makes decision not just because we think they're right, because we have a quite high certainty that those decisions are right.
That sounds awesome. I think that's a very nice way to wrap things up with your company culture, no longer corporate culture. That's a very nice nuance there. So I like to wrap things up with asking you, you've been at Flix for 2 years, but you have a wealth of experience already. We have some viewers and listeners that are maybe at the beginning of the journey with the e-commerce and with their business models. So I'd like to give you the chance to tell them 3 key learnings or advice, like do's or don'ts at that matter for them to take care of their business and scale it to the next level.
I mean, I hope I will not sound too buzzwordy, because I think that's what might happen in this situation. But I think the TikTok example and some of the examples I named tell you that it's good, number one, to keep experimenting and be bold and try out new things that will then take you to the next level. Second, I think what is then important to understand, when is the moment for those experiments to be switched into, let's say, sustainable or efficiency mode. And I think that's what we also at Flix try to do with this profitable growth strategy. So I think turning off the experiments at a certain time, keeping some experiments still there is a good indicator to understand, okay, where we need to go. That would be number 2. And the third one is probably a bit buzzwordy, but I mean, I mentioned the culture. I think it is underestimated how much the people in your company bring to the table. So just surrounding you with great people that you have fun working with, but they are also bringing the relevant expertise and knowledge to get you to where you want to go is the third thing I would mention.
Fantastic, Alex. I feel like I've learned a lot throughout this conversation. I hope our viewers and listeners agree. And we touched upon your business model. We touched upon your growth strategy, profit-based growth strategy, I think you said. And and then also giving a lot of examples how you work with partners, how you experiment on different platforms. It's been a great conversation. Thank you so much for being here with us in Berlin.
Thank you.
And see you next time.
See you. Thank you very much.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the E-commerce Germany News Podcast. If you did, make sure to give us a thumbs up, leave a comment, and follow us on our channels. Feel free to also recommend this podcast to your contacts and friends that may want to know more about e-commerce, digital marketing, and success stories. Thank you very much for listening and watching, and see you on the next episode.